My husband claimed I owed him $3,000 a month for emotional damage. The judge's response was, "My name is Margaret Ellison," and the first time I heard the words, emotional damage attached to a price tag, it was from the lips of my own husband. "You owe me $3,000 a month," he said, his voice so casual I almost thought he was joking. But the smirk on his face told me otherwise. $3,000. Every month. For what? For breathing? For existing beside him for 28 years? For daring to still be here, in the house we built, after he decided he was tired of me? At first, I laughed. I thought maybe he was trying to provoke me into some argument, the kind he always seemed to thrive on. He'd throw out a wild accusation, I'd react, and then he'd sit back smugly as if my outrage was proof of his righteousness. But this was different. His tone wasn't the sharp jab of an argument, it was cold, measured. He spoke like a businessman delivering an invoice. "For emotional damage," he added, as if the words could somehow justify the madness. "You've made my life unbearable. My anxiety, my depression, they're all because of you, and I have a right to compensation." The world tilted slightly under my feet. I remember standing in our kitchen, the late afternoon sunlight pouring through the blinds, slicing his face into bars of shadow and light. He looked almost unreal, like an actor rehearsing lines in a courtroom drama. "Are you serious?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. "Dead serious," he said. "And don't think I won't take this to court. I've already spoken to a lawyer." Something inside me crumpled at those words. Not because I believed for a second that I owed him money, but because I understood then, with frightening clarity, that this wasn't a passing tantrum. He had planned this. He had prepared. For years, he'd chipped away at me, belittling my efforts, dismissing my feelings, mocking my little victories as though they were nothing. I'd lived with it in silence, convincing myself that enduring it was easier than fighting. But now, standing in that kitchen, I realized those years of silent endurance had given him the confidence to push further, to test just how far he could drag me down. I didn't respond the way he wanted. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply walked past him, my hand brushing the counter for balance, and went upstairs. Behind the locked bathroom door, I stared at my own reflection. My face looked pale, drained, older somehow. A woman hollowed out by disbelief. Was this what I had become? Someone so invisible in her own marriage that her husband thought he could assign a monthly fee to her existence? That night I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in my head. "You owe me $3,000 a month." Asterisk. Like a curse. Like a chain he was trying to fasten around my neck. And then, 3 days later, the official envelope arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper, my name printed neatly on the front. Inside, the lawsuit. The words were sharp and impersonal, stamped with authority. He was suing me for emotional damages, requesting $3,000 in monthly payments. Reading it, I felt my heart thud painfully against my ribs. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a battlefield, and he had fired the first shot. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where he had first made his demand, the papers trembling in my hands. All those years I had given to him the meals cooked, the late nights waiting up, the sacrifices I had made so he could pursue his own ambitions, reduced to a stack of accusations on legal letterhead. It wasn't just absurd, it was humiliating. He wanted to brand me as the villain of our marriage, the one who had caused him suffering. I thought of the neighbors, the friends at church, even my own daughter. What would they think if they heard of this? That I was some cold-hearted wife who had driven her husband to despair? That I was guilty of something too shameful to name, something that deserved financial punishment? My hands clenched the papers until they crumpled. Anger burned in me. Then not the quiet, suppressed anger I'd lived with for years, but a hot, consuming fire. I wasn't going to let him write my story this way. He wanted me to cower, to fold under the weight of his accusations. He wanted me to feel worthless enough to accept his terms. But something inside me, maybe the last scrap of dignity I had been saving, whispered that this was not the end of me. If he wanted a fight in court, then that was exactly what he would get. My husband claimed I owed him $3,000 a month for emotional damage. The judge's response was, the envelope sat on the kitchen table like a living thing, pulsing with its own cruel energy. I had opened it the night before, but I couldn't stop staring at it the next morning. The official seal, the neat black ink, the words that confirmed my husband's threat. Wasn't just hot air, it was real. I was being sued. I had spent years believing that whatever storm he brought into the house, it would eventually pass. He could sulk, rage, or guilt me into silence, but eventually it would fade, and life would resume its bitter normal. But this was permanent. He had put his cruelty on paper. He had turned it into law. The complaint listed pages of grievances, each one more twisted than the last. Asterisk. The defendant frequently criticized the plaintiff in ways that caused undue psychological distress. Asterisk. Asterisk. The defendant withheld affection, contributing to the plaintiff's ongoing depression. Asterisk. Asterisk. The defendant's behavior led to anxiety, related medical costs, for which she must provide restitution. Asterisk. It was as though he had ripped pieces of our life out of context, spun them into weapons, and handed them to a lawyer to sharpen. Every accusation was either a half-truth or an outright lie. My criticisms? Those were me begging him to stop drinking, to stop gambling money we didn't have. Withheld affection? How do you love someone who treats you as an accessory, a tool, a punching bag for his disappointments? And medical costs? He never once told me about a doctor's visit for anxiety. The only medical bills I'd seen were for his knee surgery after that reckless ski trip he insisted on taking. I dropped the papers onto the table, my stomach twisting. If a stranger read this, what would they think of me? A monster of a wife, draining the life out of her poor, suffering husband. I thought of our neighbors, the Smiths across the street, who waved every Sunday morning as I left for church. I thought of my bridge group, the women who always asked how things were at home, to which I would smile politely and say, "Fine, thank you, asterisk." Would they look at me differently if this became public? Would my name end up in some court bulletin, tarnished forever by his lies? The shame pressed down heavier than the anger. I made myself a cup of tea, hoping the warmth would calm me, but even the steam rising from the mug felt oppressive. Every sip tasted like ash. When the phone rang, I startled. My daughter's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I debated answering. Did I want her to know? Did I want anyone to know? But I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I picked up. "Mom? You sound tired," she said immediately. She always noticed. "Are you all right?" I hesitated, my throat tight. "Your father. He's suing me." There was silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "What? For what?" "For emotional damage." The words felt absurd even as I said them. I could almost hear her blinking in disbelief. "He what?" "He can't. Is that even legal?" "He thinks it is," I whispered. My eyes drifted back to the papers. "And he's already filed it." She was quiet for too long. My heart sank at that silence. I had wanted outrage, solidarity, something that would remind me I wasn't alone in this. Instead, her voice came back small, uncertain. "Well, maybe you should just settle. You know how he gets. If you fight him, it'll get ugly. Maybe it's better to just—" Her words sliced deeper than the lawsuit. "Just settle. Asterisk. Just pay him off. Asterisk." As though $3,000 a month was something I could hand over. As though admitting guilt would buy me peace. "Do you think I should?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know, Mom. I just don't want you to get dragged through something worse. You've been through so much already." The conversation ended without resolution, leaving me more alone than before. My own daughter couldn't see the trap for what it was. Or maybe she saw it too clearly, and fear had paralyzed her. I stood by the window, watching the world outside continue as though mine hadn't just collapsed. A boy pedaled his bike down the street, 2 women jogged past with their dogs, and the Smiths pulled into their driveway with groceries. Normal life, untouched. And here I was, drowning in words I didn't deserve. But somewhere, underneath the despair, something hardened in me. He wanted me to fold, to admit guilt, to become the villain in his story. And for a moment, even my daughter's hesitation tempted me to do just that. But no, I had endured years of his manipulation, his cutting remarks, his cruel little power plays. I had swallowed them all because I believed keeping peace was worth more than my pride. But this was not just his cruelty, it was his attempt to define me. If I gave in, I would never reclaim myself. I placed the lawsuit back into its envelope, pressed it flat, and set it aside. Tomorrow, I would find a lawyer of my own. Tomorrow, I would take my first step onto the battlefield he had chosen. Because if he thought I would let him profit from destroying me, he was about to learn who Margaret Ellison really was. When I woke the next morning, the first thing I saw wasn't the sunlight streaming through the curtains. It was the envelope, sitting on my nightstand. I had carried it up with me, unable to leave it downstairs, as though if I kept it close, it would lose its power. But instead, it felt heavier than ever, like it had grown teeth overnight. I knew I couldn't carry this alone. My daughter had heard the bare bones of it over the phone, but she hadn't seen the pages, the way his accusations were laid out in bold print, the words that cut like knives. I needed her to understand. I needed someone, anyone, to stand with me in this. So I called her again. "Could you come over?" I asked. My voice sounded calm, but inside, my chest was tight. She arrived that afternoon, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her work blazer still on. She looked tired, as though she'd run through her day just to get here. She hugged me quickly, then pulled back, scanning my face. "Mom, you look pale. Have you eaten?" I shook my head and handed her the envelope. "Read it." She sat at the table, her hands steady as she unfolded the papers. I watched her eyes move across the words, her expression tightening. At first, disbelief. Then discomfort. Then something else, a flicker of guilt maybe. When she finally looked up, she let out a shaky laugh. "This is ridiculous. He's saying you caused his medical problems? That you ruined his peace of mind?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And he wants money for that?" "Yes." She dropped the papers back onto the table with more force than necessary. "It's insane." "But, Mom, you know how he is. He doesn't stop. If he's gone this far, I don't think he's going to back down easily." I felt my stomach twist. "So you think I should just give him what he wants?" Her face softened. "Number. That's not what I'm saying. But..." She hesitated, chewing her lip. "I just don't want you to go through this fight. Court is brutal. And you know Dad, he'll twist everything, drag out every detail. Do you really want your whole life aired out in front of strangers?" Her words stung because they echoed the fear I hadn't admitted to myself. Did I really want to sit on a witness stand, listening to him spit venom in a courtroom, while strangers judged who I was as a wife, as a woman? I reached for her hand. "Do you believe him? Even a little?" Her eyes widened. "Of course not. Mom, I know what you've lived through. I remember the nights you cried in your room when you thought I was asleep. I know how he talks to you." "Then why?" I swallowed. "Why does it feel like you're telling me to give up?" She squeezed my hand. "Because I'm scared for you. I'm scared he'll break you down in there, and I don't want to watch that happen." Her fear was real, and I loved her for it. But at the same time, it wounded me. Because what I needed in that moment wasn't protection from the fight, it was someone to stand beside me in it. We sat in silence for a while. The papers lying between us like a poisonous snake neither of us wanted to touch again. Finally, I said, if I don't fight him, he wins. Not just the money. He wins the right to rewrite our whole marriage, to paint me as the villain. Do you understand that? She nodded slowly. I do. I just don't want you to do it alone. Her words carried a promise, even if she wasn't ready to say it outright. That night, after she left, I sat at the table again, with the lawsuit spread before me. My hands traced the lines of his accusations. They were ugly, yes. They were lies, yes. But they were also an opportunity. For years, I had swallowed his cruelty, hidden it from others, even from myself. I had told myself it wasn't worth making noise, that survival was easier in silence. But now, he had put his cruelty into words, words that could be dismantled, exposed, thrown back at him. I realized then, this lawsuit was both a weapon and a weakness. He thought it would crush me, but it had given me something I never had before. Proof that he wanted to destroy me. Proof I could fight against. I whispered aloud, as though practicing for the courtroom. I do not owe you anything. Not money, not guilt, not silence. For the first time in years, my voice didn't shake. And as I sat there in the quiet house, with his lies spread out before me, I felt something stir inside me. Not just anger, not just fear, but a kind of defiance I hadn't tasted in decades. This was my life, my story. And if he wanted to drag it into a courtroom, then so be it. I would not let him be the narrator anymore.